Are the United States and Iran already at war? That's an important question that we need to discuss because the implications are obviously significant for the United States national security. As President Biden read his package of response in action of the 3 Americans that were killed in action in Jordan just a couple of days ago, many war firsters are saying that the president should go much further than what he's publicly signaling. As a matter of fact, you have some people like John Bolton who say, you know what, man, we need to hit them hard.
I think the real problem here is that the administration simply will not face up to the reality that we're seeing a war being conducted by Iran through terrorist proxies all across the Middle East. The administration is incapable of acknowledging that reality. And until they understand that fundamental basis for this whole conflict, almost anything we do will fail to deter Iran from continuing it. That's why I think that what's needed here is an attack on Iran.
So he wants to deter Iran by attacking Iran, which would seem that would spark a war. That's by definition an act of war if you attack another country. He didn't really explain that one. But if you ask Jack Keane, one of the founding members of the War Firsters, he's like, nah, because we're already there.
Iran has expanded the war. I mean, let's just look at the facts of that. We have Hezbollah, who's displaced 80,000 Israeli citizens in northern Israel because they average 6 attacks a day into northern Israel. That's an expansion. And they are an Iranian-backed proxy. The Houthis have stopped the trafficking through the Suez Canal somewhere in the neighborhood of excess of 50% because of their rockets and missiles and interference, despite the fact that we have Navy escort ships with ourselves and 11 other nations in the region. That's an expansion of the war. They are backed by the Iranians, trained, armed, and funded by them. 165, I think, is where we are now. Attacks on bases in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-backed militias, again, armed, trained, and funded by Iran. The war, they have already expanded the war. We've got to get past this delusion that our actions are going to expand the war. It's already here.
Look, what Keane wants you to believe is that, look, we're already at war, so forget all of this stuff you have to worry about getting into a war because we're there now, right? I mean, that's what he wants you to believe. And the reason is pretty self-evident. That way, you're freed up from any constraints about getting sucked into a war. So let's just do all kinds of stuff. Let's launch, war attacks into Iran. Let's hit some of Iran's biggest targets, etc. And then that way, there's no constraints. And so in his view, that actually makes more war easy, so you don't have to worry about escalation. Well, that's complete nonsense, absolute nonsense, because we're not in a war. We are not at war with Iran. It is in America's vital national interest that we not get there. And the other thing that I want to point out here, whether it's Bolton, Keane, General Kellogg, many of these other war firsters who always want to throw out missiles to solve every problem and think that it's always going to work this time, even though it almost never works and hasn't worked really effectively for decades. We'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that Keane and both Bolton especially are painting an incredibly distorted picture. Now, one of the reasons we have Deep Dive is because when you see some of these on the major television networks, you don't get context. And that is absolutely vital here. Now, if I'm telling you that we're not in a war right now, and you have Jack Keane saying we already are in a war right now, and then he lays out these several examples of why he says it. Now, without context, you may think, okay, you know what? That actually makes a little bit of sense. I see exactly what he's saying there because, man, he laid out 3 things. There has been attacks in the Red Sea that have started, and now then traffic up through the Suez Canal is severely constrained. There have been attacks by Hezbollah against Israel in the northern part of Israel. There have been, obviously, attacks against American assets in Iraq and in Syria. Now we have troops that are KIA. All of these groups have been backed by Iran. So if that's all you see, you think, yeah, I guess we kind of are in Iraq, and dang, we really should be doing something. Okay, except that's not all that's going on. That ignores the elephant in the room, which is the fact that there is an Israeli-Hamas war going on in that region that's at the heart of every bit of this. None of this attacks in the Red Sea started until November, this past November, in direct response to what was going on against the Palestinian people in the part of the Israeli-Hamas war, because Israel is killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians along with the Hamas terrorists. And in solidarity to their co-religionists and their fellow Arabs, they are now attacking into the Red Sea to try to mess things up for Israel or the United States. These attacks against our troops in in Iraq and in Syria, specifically the ones that were killed in Jordan a couple of days ago, the people who perpetrated this expressly say this is in support of our co-Arab people in the Palestinian areas in the Gaza Strip. So all of this is in response to what's going on in that war, every single bit of it. Now, there were some strikes against our troops in Iraq and Syria before that, as I've talked about many times, but it's been supercharged since the 17th of October, which is when Israel conducted its ground incursion into the Gaza Strip, and then the casualties started spiking after that. So if you're even going to think about solving the problem here, we're going to have to examine all of this in context. You got to look at all of it. They don't want you to look at any of that because they want Israel to be able to do whatever it wants, no matter what. They're unconcerned with how that's having a negative impact on American national security. And let me reiterate that. I'm as pro-Israel as anybody ever has been. What I am not, though, which distinguishes me from many others, is a reflexive, whatever the government in Tel Aviv says is fine, and we'll just support it blindly no matter what it does to us. No, I'm not that way. I'm like saying, let's support our allies, let's support our friends, but we're not going to harm ourselves, and we're not going to support issues that actually harm Israel as well. And we could talk about that another time. It's been on several of our other deep dives. Our blanket support that so many who claim to be pro-Israel do are actually encouraging things that are going to harm them, because their military first operations that they're conducting are also antithetical to their own security and will not provide the security to their people that they claim that they're trying to accomplish. It's making it worse. But we'll talk about that more in another deep dive. But for right now, we're looking at American national interest and what can we do to avoid getting drawn into an actual war. Because the key thing there that also Keene dismisses and doesn't talk about much is that so far, those things that are happening are between Israel and Hezbollah, and in the Red Sea, it affects all the nations in the world. It's not directed against the United States. So even though the attacks in Iraq and Syria are directed against American assets there, and that's something we got to deal with, they're all connected and tied back to the Israeli Hamas war. We've got to deal with that simultaneously, or these other things are going to continue. But they can be made worse. Let's be clear on this. Now, so far, Biden has not launched any attacks. And news coming out just before this broadcast began suggests that Biden is cognizant of the threat and the risk, and that he is not going to attack directly into Iran. He's going to hit some of their assets, although that's actually going to be a problem as well, as you'll see in just a second. But there are those continuing to push that says, no, Biden, we don't need to limit anything. In fact, as General Kellogg has said recently, he thinks we should go much harder and even break that escalation ladder.
They have to do what I would call super escalate. They have to take it to a level that everybody's uncomfortable, including those in the Situation Room, where you go to a level you say, okay, this isn't a gamble. It's a risk, and we understand the risks involved. But until we make a clear message and we send a clear message, these are going to continue. So you have to go outside of your normal box, and you have to break the escalation ladder. Either attack the Quds Force leaders, that's Ismail Ghani, or the Supreme Leader Khamenei, or the facilities they've got in Iran, but somebody has to make a hard call, because now we've reached a point where we're going to have to do something very hard, very strong, and the response is going to be probably, from their end, it could be proportionate. So be prepared for that.
Yeah, be prepared for that. Yeah, I'm suggesting that you take out the supreme leader of the government, and you have to be prepared for something. Dude, by any definition, that's the very act of war. The very definition of the act of war, taking out the leader. What would we do if somebody took out President Biden Even if you don't like his politics at all, it's the American president, and all Americans would be just livid and ready to go to war with anybody. Everybody would understands that. So why do you think that another country would be different from that? That's self-defeating. It's absurd to even suggest, and should be dismissed out of hand. Now, thankfully, President Biden actually is responsible for what the country does and our armed forces, and doesn't appear that he would even consider such an outlandish, ridiculous suggestion. But that's what's out there, folks. That's what a lot of people are suggesting. And I promise you, there are many people that want to do that to your harm. Now, let's look at the other half of this equation there, because as the common saying goes, the enemy has a vote. So what Keene wants, and what he claims would be the case, is if we hit certain assets, that's going to make Iran back down. In fact, Keene put it this way.
But let's take kinetic action against the IRGC, who is training, who is arming, and who is funding them. They have bases, and they also have leaders. Let's go after both of those.
Okay, and so let's go after the IRGC. So what has been their reaction? What has the IRGC later said? He released a statement earlier today. Gary, if you can bring that up there, thank you. It says, we hear threats coming from American officials. We tell them that they have already tested us, and we now know one another. No threat will be left unanswered. We are not warmongers, but they, the U.S., impose wars on us. Therefore, we will defend our causes, and we will not leave any threat unanswered. And even though we are not at war, we do not fear it. We will resist. Now, look, now some people will dismiss that and say, oh, well, that's just him trying to sound tough. He's really afraid. I'm sure he doesn't want war. Iran has been unequivocal in saying that. Biden has said we don't want war. But they clearly are not bluffing when they say they will retaliate and respond. You don't need any more evidence than to look back at what happened in 2020 when the United States assassinated one of their senior leaders. And then there was a barrage of precision-guided missiles that hit an American base in Iraq, Al-Assad Air Base. And there were 100 Americans that had traumatic brain injuries, and it was only by the grace of God that none of them were killed. And if they had been, Trump would have been under enormous pressure to take the war into Iran itself at that time. So we dodged a bullet at that point. Now then, in recent days, Iran is clearly more willing to use force in their own defense, as they have in just the past couple of weeks launched attacks against their enemies in Iraq, in Syria, and in Pakistan. Now, what rationale can any of these people make to suggest that you can take out their assets in a big way, whether the IRGC in its bases in Iraq and in Syria, or directly into Iran itself, and that they're not going to do anything, that they're going to back down, that they're not going to back down. So here's one of the things that just drives me crazy when I hear talk like this and all these people suggesting that we do all these things. They never answer the damn question, what next? What is the objective here? What is the end state? What is the attainable military objective that you want to use military force for? Those are all vital questions. You should not drop one bomb, not shoot one bullet, not send one troop to do anything until all of those questions have been answered, and the answers turn out to be something that's useful and it's militarily possible. It doesn't have to be any guarantees, but it has to be a high probability of success. The end state has to be better for the United States than the current situation. If your proposed military solution and your proposed actions will actually harm American vital national interest or make our conditions worse, then logically you should reject that course of action. That should be self-evident, but it's not. People continue to want to talk about all of these heavy kinetic actions as though it's a one-off, as though there's going to be a sustained effort here. That's what some of them want. And I suspect that the Biden administration, in fact, is signaling that this is going to be a campaign, not just a one-off shot like has been the case on the previous times they've attacked our troops in Iraq and in Syria. That's not the right answer, folks, because Iran is not going to passively back down. I mean, we keep thinking that's going to happen. We took out Saddam Hussein. How'd that work out? Turned into this explosion into a counterinsurgency fight that sucked us in for years before we finally got out, which, by the way, laid the foundation for the rise of ISIS, which we allegedly are continuing to fight to this day. How'd that work out for us, folks? Using some force there. How did it work out when we took out Gaddafi? Us and our allies took out Gaddafi in the Obama administration. How'd that work out? They are still in chaos to this day. There are two competing governments to this day that they haven't even resolved it. It's been disaster for that. We're still in Somalia, for God's sake, where we've been since the early 1990s. All these other places that we keep using force and we keep saying we're going to hit them hard and it's going to knock them down. And it doesn't. Do I need to pull up the horrific example of 2 bloody decades in Afghanistan, where we continually, every freaking year, kept telling you things are getting better. We're going to surge our troops there. We're going to increase them. We're going to hit the Taliban hard and they're on their back foot. All this nonsense. And who won that war? Who's going to forget that image you see on the screen right there? That, folks, let that sear into your mind. That is a humiliation for our country, because after 2 decades of war, this was the result. And to this day, the Taliban sit in Kabul, not the U.S.-backed government. Now, you want to go into the Middle East again, and you want to try the same bloody strategies that have backfired dramatically on us and always leave the region in a worse place and our interest in a more precarious position. This could be the worst of all of them. As bad as that Afghanistan was, mainly the Afghan people are paying the price for that, frankly. Of course, I have sorrow for that because I still have Afghan friends to this day, and it just anguishes me, all the things that have happened to those people. This one could be far worse because it won't just be the people on the ground. This time it'll be Americans who pay a price for this, because just imagine if this commander of the IRGC is good to his word, and there's no reason to think he's not, and that when Biden launches something, possibly even later tonight, or probably within the next few days at the very latest, and he does strike back. And now then, instead of just some of these homemade rockets and mortars and drones that some of these Iran-backed groups have been trying to use, what if it's Iranian precision-guided missiles that most of our defenses in that region on these small bases can't defend against? And now then, it's not 3, but 33 Americans who were killed, or 100 that are killed. What do you think is going to happen then? What is President Biden going to do then? Is he going to back down then? Is he going to withdraw the troops then? Of course, he'll come under extraordinary pressure. And I can't even imagine any president, past president or future, that would be able to resist that and say, yeah, we're gonna withdraw. Now, Ronald Reagan did after the Khobar Towers disaster, where we lost 200 Marines in Lebanon in the 1980s. He took the hard right course and withdrew our troops instead of plunging us into a war we couldn't win, and cut our losses there and ensured our security long term. And it lasted until 9/11. And then we went back in there. But all the time we were out, when everybody was afraid of vacuums and it's going to cause harm to our security, our reputation, there was none of that. It was none of that happened. All the things that all these war firsters feared at the time didn't happen. That's why President Biden should withdraw our troops right now. Listen to me, folks, as I'm making this on 31 January 2024. We are not at war with Iran right now. 3 Americans have died. No more need to die. No more of those 2,500 troops in Iraq and the 900 or so that are in Syria. They're all alive and breathing as I'm saying these words right now. If we continue to go down this path, the chances are high that many of those same people who are alive right now won't be in a matter of days from now or weeks from now. The longer this goes, the more chance that more Americans die. And let this sink in. They're not there defending your freedom. They're not there making America safe. They're not there doing anything of value or benefit to America. I don't care what anybody at the Pentagon tells you. It's not true. They're not there on an active anti-ISIS mission that has any probability, any prospect of success. They're just doing what they call tactical tasks. Yeah, they can succeed in whatever they're doing. Strategically, it will be irrelevant. It won't matter at all. So you're risking American lives, more American lives, because we've already lost some now, on a mission that cannot be militarily attained, that shouldn't even be fought. That's what's happening on the ground right now. You listen to these war firsters to the likes of Jack Keane and General Kellogg and John Bolton, who have been disastrously wrong on nearly everything that they've suggested. You want to listen to them now? No, we should not listen to them now. But listen, the president, even in these, so-called shorter versions of things or smaller versions of things he's considering, carry enormous risk as it is. Because Iran has shown, as I just mentioned, they're not going to be passive anymore. They are going to take action because I think they perceive they're in a stronger position. And this whole Israeli-Hamas war is one of the reasons why, because Israeli public opinion is turning against their own government. And certainly global public opinion is significantly turned against Israel, even a portion in the United States. And our own reputation continues to suffer loss as a result of our blanket support and are not willing to do anything. Until we get that war ended, and we can definitely move in that direction, because we need to start putting some strings on American support for our interest and Israel's, as I argue. Because right now they're going down a path that's going to harm their own interests as well. Again, we'll cover that later. But we're interested right now in keeping America safe, keeping our troops safe. No more American families of our troops need to be going through the agony and the anguish that those three right now from Georgia are suffering. I grieve hard for those people because I know of it. I mean, look at those faces, all wonderful people. I mean, you can just see those are great folks. There's no doubt about it. They didn't need to die. No more of them need to die. But if we keep going down this path, folks, that list will grow. And if we do get into an actual war, the consequences could be catastrophic for us. And the last thing I'll point out here is that, look, even just our own ammunition inventories, we've been given so much ammunition for years to Ukraine. We've been given a lot of stuff, and we want to do more to Taiwan in the Asia Pacific region. We're expending a lot in the Red Sea. We're giving tons of stuff now to Israel. We're expending our own air defense capacities in the Middle East already on just trying to keep our troops in Iraq and Syria safe. Now, imagine if we actually get into a war that is sustained because they don't give up. We're firing missiles against the Houthis in the Red Sea. That has no end in sight. They did this for years, like almost a full decade against Saudi Arabia. They were never completely knocked down. They continued to fight. We can't afford this. We cannot afford to get into a war. It could literally harm our existence as a nation, because now our capacity to actually defend ourselves will continue to shrink until somebody may want to test it, folks. Let's don't get there. Let's don't find out where that line is. Let's shut this down now. Do the right thing. If you love Reagan, do like Reagan did, and when he withdrew our forces instead of getting us drawn deeper into a war. There is some precedence for that. I don't know if Biden's strong enough to do that. I pray to God he is. For your sake and for all Americans, I pray that happens. That's your deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in. We are unintimidated and uncompromised on bringing you the truth, folks. These are hard truths I'm giving you today. This is stuff that's not popular among many people, but you need to hear it and they need to hear it, because all of this grandstanding that these folks like Keene and Bolton, that's all keep talking about, it's going to get your troops killed, and it's going to one day affect all of us. I pray that we don't see that day. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.